Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Erkki and Dr. Schwabe. You are most welcome, gentlemen.
Well, thank you for hello, everyone. Peace to you all.
Great to see you. Salam to you all. And for those who don't know, Dr. Erkki Kojonen, I beg your pardon, is University Lecturer in Systematic Theology at the University of Helsinki in Finland. And Dr. Schwabe Ahmed Malik is Lecturer in Science and Religion at the University of Edinburgh here in the UK. And we're here today to talk about a fascinating new book that's about to be published, titled Design Discourse in Abrahamic Traditions, History, Metaphysics, and Science, edited by Schwabe and Erkki. And it's published by Routledge. And it's due out next year, I think, 2025. The dust jacket informs us that Design Discourse in Abrahamic Traditions, the book in question, reconnects discussion of design arguments to its Jewish, Christian, and Muslim history. The ancient idea that there is evidence of purpose in nature remains one of the most debated topics in science and religion, but also one with great potential for interreligious and interdisciplinary dialogue. So there's much more one can say about this book. So perhaps, Erkki, you could introduce us to the purpose of this book, which is an anthology, isn't it, of essays. And how does it contribute to the discussion about design in nature?
Well, thank you, Paul. Actually, the book is already out, although I'm pretty much taking it on faith because I haven't received my author's copies yet, nor has Schwabe. But our libraries have gotten the electronic copy, so I think there's evidence that the book does exist.
This is reassuring.
Routledge is a fairly reliable source, so.
We have faith. We have faith.
We all have faith. It exists.
Yeah. Like most of our knowledge comes through testimony of this sort. So I see no reason to doubt Routledge.
Excellent.
Yeah, but yes. So Schwabe and I have both been working on design arguments for a while, and the whole idea of does nature reveal a creator or designer? And of course, we all know the contemporary discussion about this. People often talk about evolution, and people maybe talk about cosmic fine-tuning and these kind of issues. But with our book, we wanted to give a bit of historical context, and so not just to talk about what happened in history and how these issues have been discussed since the Jewish and Christian and Muslim roots of these arguments, the Greek roots, the Roman roots, and so on, but we also wanted to connect these to the contemporary discussion. So we wanted to ask in the various chapters, what can we learn, from these ancient formulations of the idea for the contemporary discussion? And basically, we think this kind of discussion is actually required because when you look at the contemporary discussion, you don't really have to look very long until you just scratch the surface a little bit and you notice that all kinds of theological views are underlying both the opponents and the critics and the defenders of design arguments. So
yeah,
it's like the goodness of the creator, for example, or the beauty of nature, and the issue of how does divine action and natural processes, how do those fit together? Can God act through a natural process? Can a natural order testify of the creator, or does evidence of God have to come only through miracles? Yeah. And those are issues that we already face, in very early on, or the issue of chance versus design, for example. All of these we can already see in the early history. So it's very, very interesting, and it's also an interesting example because this is an area where there has been such a great amount of positive interaction between our traditions, so Christianity and Judaism and Islam. So people have actually learned something from each other, and it hasn't been this kind of opposition necessarily.
Yeah. And Dr. Schwabe, you and Erkki are both editors, as I say, of this new book. So we'd like to continue what Erkki's saying from your perspective.
Yeah. So what I found really interesting was that we all came to a melting pot from different backgrounds, and this whole thing actually started off with a grant that Erkki applied for So there was a big project at St. Andrews called the New Visions in Theological Anthropology. It was a grant that was given to them by JTF, and they were dishing out sub grants. So Erkki applied for one where we have a kind of an Abrahamic dialogue, thinking about design discourses. And we actually had this online conference during COVID. Erkki, am I right? It was COVID time, right? Yeah. And,
it was.
yeah, and it was amazing. So we got like, senior scholars, upcoming scholars, and people coming in from different traditions. And it was an amazing melting pot because we have, so what makes this fascinating is one, the diversity, but two, also we do the historical work as well as the constructive work. So some of the chapters are looking at, discussions within their context and their time. Erkki will tell you about a chapter about mosquitoes and Aquinas soon. so we'll get to that.
Usual position. I've not heard that before.
so you'll get to that. And then we've got other stuff where we've got people engaging with contemporary conversations. Like my own chapter is engaging with Stephen Meyer's new book, The Return of the God Hypothesis.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, this is the book, The Return of the God Hypothesis, Stephen Meyer. Your chapters, 3 scientific discoveries that reveal the mind of the universe. Absolutely fascinating book.
Yeah. And so
I have to correct because it's not Aquinas, it was actually Augustine. So
Augustine.
One of our chapters is actually a recently discovered sermon of Augustine's on the design and order of
Is
nature.
it what, 1,600 years to discover? Well, that's amazing. Gosh.
Yeah. But there is one of these sermons that is especially relevant. I mean, he does discuss the orderliness of nature in very many of his works, and
yeah.
If the prophets had been silent, nature would have still testified of the Creator. That's a common theme in many of Augustine's works. But then there's this sermon where he seems to want to perhaps even annoy or wake up his listeners by talking about how even the mosquitoes, proboscis, which it uses to suck blood, or even the humble gnat, those are also so wonderfully intricately ordered. So he takes these as.
Oh, is that available? Is that available online, by the way? Can one access this new sermon by Augustine about the gnat online or the mosquito?
I'm not sure if it's translated into English. I mean, quite a lot of this literature is in Latin, and that's not my chapter. I'm not an Augustine scholar, so I would have to ask the author.
Erkki,
whether it can be accessed.
to translate it for us.
Yeah. Yes,
No,
that would be very interesting, actually.
I'd love to do that. Yeah. Anyway, enough about mosquitoes. Shoaib, you were saying?
No. I was making the point that there was amazing diversity, and we were looking at it from different vantage points. But underlying the whole project was very interesting shared theme that all of these traditions, all of these interlocutors do feel that there is sufficient evidence at least to indicate awe, design, and design pointers, basically. I think that was very, very beautiful about the whole project. That's what I took away from it. That I think that despite some of our theological differences across the traditions, there's this common core ground that we can at least all share and be happy with. I think that was a big takeaway point for me.
Right. I mean, if I might just share just 2 verses from the New Testament. I don't normally quote the New Testament like this. I think this speaks powerfully to this common understanding that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity share. So Paul writes in Romans chapter 1, verse 19, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them ever since the creation of the world. His eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made. So they are without excuse." I was struck by this, how powerful this rhetoric and this theology, very clear, powerfully, concisely expressed. And I thought absolutely marvelous. One of the things that impressed me about Paul at this point. But is that something, Shoaib, that Muslims can agree with, presumably Jews as well? Is very Jewish views found in the Old Testament?
I think so. I think that, as you'll see, I think we have 3 chapters from the Islamic side in this volume. I think that we have 12 in total. And so there's a good, representation from all 3 traditions. And you will see that there is this underlying unity that, the creation does declare signs of the divine. and that's a very powerful theme. I think that, and I was joking with Erkki in another podcast that perhaps this could turn into a new argument called the meta-Abrahamic argument for God. So, or design, right? The mad argument. And I thought that's what I want to call it, the mad argument with that acronym.
Oh, that's not great PR. You need to find a different name. Mad argument. Because the atheists would say, yep, it's a mad argument.
But this sort of cultural convergence on similar ideas is really very interesting. I mean, when you have similar ideas that people either discover or agree on with opposing traditions, that does lend some support to the idea that at least there's a common human intuition, perhaps, or something to be studied a little bit further. Although, of course, people have disagreed on just how strong the evidence of design is and how we should cash this out. Like when St. Paul says that the nature reveals its creator, then we still discover quite a few people who weren't convinced by this evidence. So how should we explain this? And that's the question that rises. But at least there's some sort of there's quite a lot of universality to this. And yeah, so even many skeptics of design arguments have testified that they also experience the same intuition of design when they're looking at nature.
Yes.
For example, David Hume, in his dialogues concerning natural religion, he has this skeptic character, Philo, and the skeptic does also say that they have the same intuition, and that it's a very powerful intuition that they have to then work very hard with skeptical arguments to overcome.
But I mean, what I find interesting, I mean, you're right. Richard Dawkins, the British retired professor, notorious atheist, says also even he has admitted to this sense of design, although he discounts a designer, of course. But what's interesting that the passage I quoted from Romans is not just saying there is a designer; it's saying something moral here. I think it's saying these people who deny God are without excuse, because it is plain to them and has been made known to them. So there's actually a moral dimension that they are failing in some way to see the truth. So it's not just a question of argumentation or science. There's a culpability, it seems, according to Paul anyway, in the failure to acknowledge God in his creation. And there's an accusation there, isn't there? It's not just a question of philosophy here. There's a question of people are being pointed to and say, you have failed to see what's there, and you are without excuse. So how do you feel about, is that something that one can talk about in these discussions about design even?
Yeah, so the theologians have had a bit different opinions on that passage. Like, does Paul mean the individual culpability, or does he mean the culpability of an entire culture, for example? So if you think about a child growing up in the Soviet Union, for example, who gets taught from very, very early on that, of course, there's no God, then will that child be culpable for the non-belief, or is it the whole culture which is somehow going against God's existence and sort of twisting their view of the evidence? So people have had different opinions on that. But in my chapter, I look at the church fathers, who definitely did quite often think that there was a kind of culpability, at least on this general level, that there's something clear or even obvious about the existence of God, and people are surrounded by some sort of evidence of God, so they should turn to God for that reason. And this is something that gets developed in Christian natural theology, and also interestingly in the Syrian natural theology, the contemplative tradition. That Julian de Carnaux in his book on the topic even argues that perhaps the early Muslims, perhaps even the Quran's way of stating that, was influenced or related to this in Christian environment, because it uses very similar ways of stating the idea that nature is a kind of book that has certain signs that you can read from there, the existence of God.
Shoaib, what do you think?
No, yeah, I mean, I resonate with that. I think that it's profound that we have the same word for the verse in the Quran as well as for signs of God, alam, right?
Yeah.
So that speaks to that, resonance between the two. That it's not just the book that you're reading; it's also the work of God that you can see being declared all around you. And what I found very interesting is that the word kafir, the word we use to declare somebody a disbeliever, it's also used to refer to somebody who tills the ground for to reap the the benefits of the fruits. It's
Like
because
like a farmer.
yeah, it's because they're covering the truth. And so that's why some people think that it's a height of arrogance to say all of this came from nothing. Right. That's one kind of axiological line you can pick up if you wanted to, and you'll find that across not just the Islamic tradition but also in other traditions as well.
Yeah. Now I've noticed there are, as you say, 12 chapters in this book. Many contributors have contributed, not just the two of you, of course. So we have Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Can you tell us a bit more about the sheer range and subject matter of this anthology of essays?
So sure. I mean, we basically start, of course, with Jewish philosopher Philo, who, to our knowledge, is the first one in the Abrahamic traditions who brought in the design argument and giving credit to the Stoic and Greek philosophers, and then very much was an influence on the Christian church fathers on this issue. So they considered him a very good philosopher. Then in my chapter, I go through the early Christian sources, beginning with our earliest apologists for Christianity and ending with the great Saint Athanasius and Saint Gregory of Nyssa, for example, who were very instrumental in defending Trinitarian doctrine also, but they also had arguments for God's existence and particularly seem to appeal to a kind of design-like argument. Although they don't use the word design argument, but we can see many of the same features of design arguments already so early on. Like there's the comparison between chance and divine design, and there's certain analogies that are used to argue for God's existence. Like if you have an orderly musical harmony, then that's going to have a composer. If you have a city that is lawful, that's going to have a lawful governance. So if you look at apply the same reasoning to nature, then you will also see that there has to be a creator. This is the kind of argumentation that they use. So then we move on to Augustine and then to the early Muslim thinkers and how they pick up many of the same themes that were used by the Christians. We move then to the scientific revolution. We go through the argument from laws of nature. If we have such thing as a law of nature, is that better explained on theism as a result of design than without theism, for example? And then we go on to the very newest discussions, such as on how to understand the nature of biological teleology in philosophy of biology. We go down to the fine-tuning argument too, and that's actually the capstone article of our book. Is by Robin Collins. And what does the fine-tuning argument tell us about God? Does it only reveal some kind of designer that we can't know anything about, or does the fine-tuning argument actually itself require a kind of omnipotent good creator rather than just some unidentified intelligent designer?
Yeah. And Shoaib, your chapter is an engagement with this. It's called An Islamic Engagement with Stephen Myers, The Return of the God Hypothesis. Could you just briefly mention what you're trying to achieve in that chapter?
Yeah, I mean, this is just an engagement with his newest work. So I think that's his third monograph on the subject matter, and he's very forthcoming in this. And so this was a very interestingly a student collaboration. So when I was teaching at Cambridge Muslim College, I did ask, do any of you want to work on a research project that I'm currently filling out? and they were interested in intelligent design. We actually had an assignment on intelligent design as part of their Islam and Science course, and so two of them stepped up. This is Yasmin and Muhammad Imran, and both of them did a phenomenal job in terms of going through the book, distilling ideas forward, and it resulted in this chapter. And I think it's a good constructive engagement, and we just bring forth certain contentions about intelligent design, at least from the Ash'ari standpoint. It was a good exercise for them. It was a learning curve for myself as well, and I think it was a good outcome. It follows very nicely from my previous research on ID as well.
Yeah, excellent. So there's a collaboration between you and students at the Cambridge Muslim College in England. Absolutely fascinating to see that, and that's a wonderful project. And the last essay, essay 12, From Design to God: What Fine-Tuning Design Arguments Tell Us About the Designer, by Robin Collins. So I must ask, who is your intended readership, your intended audience for this book? Is it other academics, your colleagues, or is it for the more general educated lay public, if I can put it that way?
So, of course, I think anyone in the educated lay public who's interested in these topics, we would welcome you all to read the book. But I mean, it's an academic book, so it has quite a big price, unfortunately. But we hope you can get it to a library, for example. So
yes,
So some of our contributors will also share their papers online or through email if requested.
I just add
this will make a big impact also on the academic level, but also for the general public. I mean, these are issues that people are really interested in, and we try to get all of the chapters written in a way that are comprehensible to anyone without a technical vocabulary, for example.
Yeah, just to add to Erki, I think that this will be interested to a few audiences. I'm very positive. So in the academic space, I think it'll be of interest to historians, philosophers of religion, people doing theology, also people doing interfaith work. So it's a lot of camps, and of course, science and religion. But I also feel that the chapters, to some degree, are accessible enough that as long as you have an educated background, so you've gone through at least high schools, at least first 1 or 2 years of university, you should be able to engage with the material. We've tried to make this accessible enough such that it triggers further thought. For me personally, after doing this volume, I even told Erki several times on Facebook that I have now, I've started researching in other areas of design arguments in my own research. So Razi, we talked about Razi when you were here in Edinburgh, Paul, right? So
yes.
In his like culminating work, Al-Matalib Al-Aliyah, he has 200 pages of extensive arguments for God's existence, right? He goes through all of them, contingency, kalam, etc. And after all that, like the most sophisticated thinker of Islamic theology says, the best argument seems to be the design argument that are reflective of the Quran. Something simple, accessible, intuitive, the ones that stir the heart. That completely blew me away. That generally blew me away. So I've had because of this project and certain findings after this project, I've had a bit of a shift in terms of how I even approach design. I view design as a very propositional thing, and that has its space. I definitely view that has its space, but it's made me now feel that there's also a non-propositional way of doing design. And this book, I think, welcomes those kinds of conversations. I think it's a start.
And that nicely ties in with what I do on Twitter. So with the no design post, this is not an advert for my stuff. I'm just saying that the no design post is do exactly it attempt to elicit that spontaneous acknowledgement and reaction that this is God's created universe through the infinitely extraordinary ayat, the signs that one sees, whether it be in birds or trees or phenomena in the cosmos or DNA or whatever. All of these speak powerfully of design, and it's an intuitive argument. It's not based, as you say, on a series of rational propositions that one has to go through in a kind of syllogistic way, but an immediate. And in Islam, we call the other word the fitra, this instinctive awareness of the divine, which is part of our natural disposition. So this is really a call to awaken within our natural humanity shared by all of us, to acknowledge design and the creator behind the apparent, behind what is seen. There's the unseen dimension. And that's what these design posts are meant to elicit and evoke in the person who bothers to see them. So that nicely dovetails with what you're saying. The Razi concluded was the most effective argument.
I have to say, I was very taken aback. I did not expect that from a scholastic theologian at the end of the line. But even he saw that there's this thing about design that captivates the hearts that no series of contingency arguments is ever going to do.
And it appeals to everyone universally. You don't have to have read a book or be educated to first or second year level at university. It's something that the simplest child can grasp intuitively. I think it's a very authentic experience.
Yeah.
So that's something that I also saw when reading this early Christian material, and the chapter on Augustine's sermons. Like it was not just trying to impress the readers or listeners with a kind of syllogistic argument. It was rather trying to awaken them to a kind of wonder at the beauty of nature. So that's why there's a discussion of the details, and it's a kind of contemplation of nature and a kind of spiritual matter of spiritual formation in a kind of way. So you can contemplate nature in a correct kind of way, and then see the creator's wisdom behind that. So that's something you can see in a lot of early Christian authors. That is certainly not just some argument, but it's a way of contemplating nature,
exactly.
way of relating to God in a way. But of course, then there can also be value in taking such intuitive knowledge and trying to examine it through an argumentative lens and see whether it's theoretically sound and logically sound and so on.
And also, just on the level of the structure of the book itself, I'm immensely, impressed and heartened to see that Muslims, Jews, and Christians, are collaborating together on an intellectual enterprise to do with faith. So this is not an intra-religious argument. This is something that stresses the commonalities that we all share. And at this particular time in our history, where so many of our communities are at loggerheads in the world, that this is a very positive irenic move, I think, and should be welcomed for that reason alone.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is that this was done already. This kind of cross-cultural collaboration was done already so early on. Like early Muslims got so much. Many influences from the Christians and the Greeks and Jews, and then the medieval Christians in turn read what the Muslim philosophers were saying. So it's a very, very interesting dynamic that goes on there. I mean, of course, doesn't mean that there's no disagreements that should also be talked about, but having some opportunity for agreement is also very nice.
Yes, absolutely. Shoaib, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that this book can be a force for good, that I think different people from very different religious traditions, even from different disciplinary backgrounds, can come together and do a solid job on trying to see the commonalities across all three traditions. And I think this is a good project that points towards that. And I hope there are many more. I hope this isn't like the end of the line. I hope there are other people who take this up and localize these conversations even further. So I can see potentially people looking at phenomenological design from different angles. I would like to see that looked at from an Abrahamic perspective. So you refer to the fitra. Would that be the same as the sensus divinatis, for example, in the Christian tradition? So I'd like to see that kind of inquiry.
I think it is, isn't it, Erkki? Isn't it pretty much the same equivalent? More or less.
I mean, it seems to come pretty close. I'm not quite sure how Ibn Taymiyyah formulates the fitra specifically. So Jamie Turner is trying to research that. I think Jamie thinks it's pretty close to the sensus divinatis of Alvin Plantinga and others, John Calvin.
Yeah. So I think that so even within the Islamic tradition, so everyone agrees there's a fitra. what it contains or what is disposed to is a point of disagreement. That's why I said I'm not sure if it has that neat correlation.
Because Ibn Taymiyyah develops this in a very, very extensive way, quite a way that many other people hadn't done before. So I'm not saying that Ibn Taymiyyah's understanding of the fitra is the same as the sense of the divine, but I think a more simple definition of that might well see.
Yeah. Like those kinds of things to be fleshed out, either in philosophy, religion, epistemology, or science dialogue. I think there's so much scope to do a lot more. And I hope this volume triggers those kinds of research lines. And I think that myself and Erkki, we're working in our own spaces to kind of further some of these thoughts into our own fields. I suspect. I find it to be a very good project on many fronts in terms of science, religion, outreach, crossing different traditions, crossing different disciplines. I think this truly represented what I refer to as Abrahamic science-engaged theology. Has the multi-religious background, and it's doing science-engaged theology. It's looking at these localized conversations within the interface of science and religion. I don't know, Erkki, did you feel that same way?
Yeah, I did. So I think there's several issues where it could be fruitful to do this kind of work further. For example, in comparing how Christians and Jews and Muslims understand the relationship between their historical scriptures and scientific studies. So if you, for example, read the Hadith literature and you find something really strange or weird from the perspective of science, then how do you go about sort of harmonizing that? And we could check how do Muslims do it, and then how do Christians do it. Yeah. So in a lot of polemical context, there's the problem that you take sort of a very different criteria for your own religion than for the other religions. So for example, you might take a very critical historical understanding to the Bible, but then for the Quran you might apply a very traditionalistic understanding and not at all consider what the historical critical scholarship do, or you might do vice versa. So you might treat the Bible very uncritically, but be super critical of the Quran. So I think you should have a kind of consistent criteria and try to be fair to the other tradition and see to what extent are our ways of reasoning the same and so on. And where are the sort of problems and strengths of each tradition in tackling issues like this in more detail. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But this is one area where I think we can find quite a lot of potential to learn. Yeah. And I mean, if you look at medieval Christians and medieval Muslims and how they related, for example, cosmology and the reading of the Bible or the Quran, that's very interesting. In to what extent do they use similar reading strategies? And nowadays with the historical critical scholarship, for example. But here with the issue of creation, this has historically been something where there's perhaps the most agreement among the traditions, because all of them believe that there is one creator behind the universe who has also somehow revealed himself through nature. So although there's within each tradition there's also very different ideas of how we can recognize that revelation, how theological epistemology should work. So, yeah. But there's a lot of interesting work that could be done here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to divert from our topic, but some of the comments you made there about the historical critical method and how they apply to the Bible and how they apply to the Quran, this is a very interesting area indeed. And I think there are different views here. Many Muslims are critical of the HCM in terms of the philosophical assumptions that are packed into it, and also to do the ontology of the Quran as well. Is it like any other writing? Is it just like any other human writing, but inspired, shall we say? Is that the Islamic understanding of the ontology of the Quran as speech of God, or not? So it is a very fascinating subject of discussion, and obviously we can't go into that now, although I'd love to. But
one second before you conclude that point. So interestingly, I have a conference on miracles, and Erkki, am I right? You're submitting an abstract for that, right? So
I mean, I don't know if I have the time to do that, but ideally, I would love to hear what you have to say about the miracles, and maybe you can help me think about it as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I've been interested in the Islamic arguments for a long time as well, although I haven't haven't found them convincing. But you know, this would be a good opportunity for me to learn.
So the discussion Erky and I have been having behind the scenes is the whole i'jaz al-Quran, like what makes the Quran a miracle, right?
Yeah.
And so Erky is trying to come at it from a non-Muslim background to see exactly, okay, how can I evaluate this, right? And so what is this necessary and sufficient criteria through which I can say, aha, okay, this qualifies. And so I'm looking forward to his engagement when that conference comes up. That's our very first conference at Cambridge, at Edinburgh, right? Which we have under a colloquia called ICE, Islamic Colloquia of Edinburgh, and we hold that every year. So I hope that Erky works into that. I think that'll be very, very fun to see. But that's me kind of digressing.
Those are so interesting. These arguments. Of course, maybe Maurice Bucaille's work would be one example of this kind of polemical work where you apply different criteria to the Quran and the Bible, for example. So, but I know there's so much more sophisticated stuff that
there is.
what Muslims have written, and so many Muslims are also now critical of the idea of scientific miracles in the Quran. So I think that's really welcome. That this is something that is also interreligious dialogue can help us. You know.
Yes, I think
appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of our arguments. So.
I think that's right. I think it's maybe at this stage, instead of us people in general polemically arguing against each other, but just to try and understand the other, exactly what the arguments are. So what exactly does Islam say about its own Quran? What does it say? Because it's often not understood. Is it just like the Muslims' Bible? You know, the Bible, Christians have that, Muslims have the Quran. You know, they're both inspired by God. I mean, but that's a misunderstanding, because that's not the Islamic view. Without going into the details. So I think it's really important just to clear the terrain, to be clear what exactly is the normative position for Muslims, the normative position, if there's such a thing, for Christians. And I know there are differences. Before we even engage at a more argumentative level or dialogical level, just to understand our position. Because I often find we don't understand each other. Christians make assumptions, Muslims make assumptions, not always accurately rooted in actual beliefs that Muslims and Christians might hold.
Yeah, that's right. And then there can also be a kind of also unnecessary oppositions between science and faith, and even between historical critical scholarship and faith.
Yes.
And for example, earlier I mentioned the work by Julian de Hanoux on the Quran and the late antique Christians. So this is a kind of work of critical scholarship. The title is Creation and Contemplation, the Cosmology of the Quran and its Late Antique Background, from 2023. But this, I thought it was a really interesting way of trying to show this kind of early discussion between Muslims and late antique Christians. And Syrian and Arabic versions. So even if perhaps you are critical of some of the assumptions of critical scholarship, maybe you can still find something of value there. And I would hope that there's these kinds of links between the different science and faith conversations, where what we've talked about the study of early Islam and the relationship between early Islam and late antique Christian and Jewish thought, that's also gonna give us maybe some insights into this discussion on design arguments and natural theology. So,
absolutely. Okay, well, shall we draw that to a close now? Perhaps you could just summarize again, just to refresh our memories of the purpose of this anthology of essays. It's a collection of essays written by various different experts. Why should we read it? Why should we care? Why is this book important for us to engage with, to understand, to read, and to improve our understanding? Why should we engage with this book, in summary?
So I think there's just so much to learn from the ancient history of how the Muslims and Jews and Christians talked about design. I mean, Paul, you have your No Design campaign where you show these examples of design. You know, and when we look at the early Christians and Jews and Muslims, and also one interesting thing is that their knowledge of design was also based on this very visual and not necessarily scientific understanding of nature. So then maybe this raises the question that do we need to know about the bacterial flagellum or the cosmological fine-tuning evidence to formulate a design argument? So is there a general level design argument available? And well, I personally think, of course, that science and the intelligibility of nature, the fine-tuning evidence and all this adds to the power of design arguments. But we should try to formulate a design argument so that it doesn't make our ancestors irrational. So this kind of detailed scientific knowledge is not necessarily required for rationality, even though it might add to the case. Another interesting issue is the breadth of metaphors that were used in this history. Nowadays, we quite commonly compare organisms and biological machines, for example, but earlier we had these, metaphors of songs, law-governed cities, a much broader range. So this can really incite our imagination.
Mm-hmm.
The third interesting issue is perhaps related to, even evolution. Like, are design arguments necessarily in contradiction with evolution? If you look at many of the early arguments, they were based on very general level order. So it could be that they would have just seen evolution as insofar as evolution is accepted by the listener, then maybe they would have seen evolution just as one more example of the orderliness of nature, not necessarily contradictory to design arguments. So
Okay.
There's so many interesting perspectives that
Yes.
we hope the academic and popular level discussion will take from this.
Sure.
I would also just add to what Erkki said is, in addition to seeking an understanding of the world, be it engaging with science or religion, or just pondering over questions, deep questions. What I got more than anything from this was just my interactions with Erkki. I got so much benefit just talking to Erkki behind the scenes in terms of back and forth. And there's this amazing acceptance of epistemic humility that sometimes we don't know what the other person knows. And I think that draws closer bonds in the making of this book. And I feel like this is an invitation to that, to speak to your brethren and your sisters from the other religion, who sometimes you think, are miles apart, but when you crack through that initial wall, you begin to see there's some commonalities, and you can use that as a starting point to discuss non-oppositionally going forward.
Right, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Shoaib and Dr. Erkki, for your time. Fantastic book, well done. And I hope it has a wide readership. I hope it becomes a resource text for university courses and the educated general reader for years to come. And it's a fantastic endeavor. And well done to all the contributors as well to the novel. So thank you very much. And I hopefully invite you both on again, and you can continue this conversation, actually, looking at some of the particular issues from a Christian/Islamic, even get a Jewish theologian or scholar to discuss his or her views as well, inshallah. So thank you very much indeed. Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.